children, no pets. You guys came up with a lot of really good ideas about what it might be about. Thank you for your honesty, whether you thought you'd like to read it or not. But I just ask you to be open to maybe liking it if you didn't think you would. So we'll see. But a little story about this book. It was always on our shelf at home when I was growing up, when I was your age, and it always intrigued me. And goodness, that was probably about 40 years ago. And I don't know, it just, when I looked at it, I thought, oh, I'd like to read it. There's something about it that I thought looked good. And I never did. Well, when my mom eventually sold the house and moved out and things like that, I love books and I hate getting rid of them. So I ended up getting a bunch of the old books we had in the home that I grew up in. And just last year, I was going through some boxes that I had, and this was in it. Even older than when I had seen it. So it was printed in 1956, so you were very right. It's an old book. And so I read it because I thought, gosh, I've never read the book, and I liked it. So, and there's a couple reasons why I wanted to share it with you. One of them is we're going to practice working on questions or questioning while you're reading. So good readers ask questions. They ask questions while they're reading. And I don't mean like questions like, what's the cat's name? That's not the kind of question I'm asking. I'm asking those wondering questions. You guys did a really good job with coming up with some of those wondering questions with just looking at the title, looking at the cover, you know, seeing how old it is. You came up with some really good wondering questions. So that's what I want you to focus on as we read this, or as I read it to you. I'm not going to make you watch me and look at me the whole time. I'll have the video focus on the book so you can read along as I read along. Yeah, so I want you to think of, be actively noticing those questions that pop up in your head. And as I'm reading it and as you're going along, any questions that pop up, jot them down. And afterwards, after each of the chapters, what I'd like you to do in the comment section below is to add those questions that you came up with, those wonderings that you had. Boy, I really wish that we could be together to read this. I really miss you guys so much, just being with you and teasing you and hugging you and just messing around. But I'm really enjoying everybody getting a chance to put their discussion questions when we've had those virtual discussions in class. And yeah, it's making everybody share. So that's been pretty awesome. So another thing I noticed with you guys coming up with what you thought the story might be about, I thought these guys have great ideas for stories. So even if your prediction wasn't what the story's about, that might be something you might want to explore in developing your own story. So good job with that. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the book. If you don't, I know you'll be honest with me. Remember, I always appreciate the honest answer, not just the right answer. So, all right, well, we'll get started with No Children, No Pets.
No Children, No Pets, a novel by Marion Holland, written back in 1956. That's older than me, guys. To the tenants of the real apartment house in Florida, this story is affectionately dedicated. The first chapter, Airmail Registered. Jane was alone in the house when the registered airmail letter came. At least she was alone if you didn't count 4-year-old Betsy, who was taking a nap. Mother wouldn't be home from work for an hour yet, and Don had gone off to the playground pool to swim. It was so hot that Jane almost wished she had taken Betsy and gone too. But no matter how cooled off you got in the pool, you always arrived home again hotter than ever, after the long walk home through the crowded, stifling streets. Victoria the cat had the right idea. She was stretched out as flat as a gray fur rug on the floor just inside the front screen door. When the doorbell rang, Victoria didn't even twitch a whisker, and Jane had to step over her to take the letter from the postman. "Sign here," he said, handing her a slip of paper and a stubby pencil. Jane stared at the thick envelope. "But it's not for me, it's for my mother." "Sign her name and your name under it." Jane wrote Mrs. Mary Sanders and, underneath it, Jane Ann Sanders. The handwriting was a little wobbly because the paper was propped up against the door jamb, but the postman didn't even glance at it. He stuck the paper in a little notebook and walked off whistling, just as though he took registered airmail letters to people every day of the week, which perhaps he did. Jane had seen the postmark before, Palm Glade, Florida. That was where Mother's great-uncle John lived. Every year they got a letter from him at Christmas time, and every year it was the same thing. 3 $1 bills, one each for Don and Jane and Betsy, and a letter for Mother, full of good advice like, waste not, want not, and a penny saved is a penny earned. Mother only laughed at the letters and then threw them in the wastebasket. But they always made Jane and Don mad, as if they ever wasted anything at the Sanders house, especially since Father died, and Mother went back to her old job at the city library. But this wasn't Christmas. It was the 3rd of August. Maybe great-great-Uncle John had decided to send them an un-Christmas present for once. Not that it would be a bit like him, thought Jane, propping the letter up on the bookcase where Mother would be sure to see it the minute she came in. But it was Don who came in first, carrying his wet bathing trunks. "Boy, is it ever hot outside," he complained, stepping over Victoria. "You could fry an egg on the pavement. Hey, where'd that letter come from?" "It wasn't in the mail this morning." "It's for Mother," said Jane, "from great-great-Uncle John." "Bet it isn't," he retorted. "Look at the stamps. Registered, 30 cents. Airmail, 6 cents. 36 cents on a letter you can send for 3? Waste not, want not, you know." "Well, put it down before you drip all over it," said Jane loftily. Even if Don was bigger than she was more than a year older, and she didn't believe in letting him forget it. "Go hang your bathing trunks in the bathroom and be quiet about it, or you'll wake Bets," she added. "She isn't asleep," Don called Don from the back of the house. "Anyway, she isn't in bed." "She must have gone out back to play," said Jane, heading for the kitchen. The refrigerator door was open, and Jane shut it on the way by. She looked out in the tiny paved yard, just big enough for the trash cans, and Betsy's little sandbox. "Elizabeth Louisa Sanders!" exclaimed Jane. "What are you doing?" Betsy looked up with big, solemn eyes. Her curls were pulled up on top of her head and fastened with a rubber band on account of the heat, and her pink face was streaked with dirt and sweat. "It is not either hot enough to fry an egg," she said reproachfully. The egg carton, which should have been in the refrigerator, was on the back step, and there were big globs of raw egg mixed with shells on the hot cement. The remains, at least 3 more eggs, were dribbling down the front of Betsy's sunsuit. "Oh, Bets," wailed Jane, "just look at the mess. And Mother will be home any minute, and eggs cost money, too. And stop laughing," she added angrily to Don. "This is all your fault, going around all the time saying it's hot enough to fry an egg." "But I didn't really mean it." "You can just quit grinning and clean up this mess while I wash Bets. And I do really mean it," said Jane grimly. She stripped off Betsy's sunsuit and tossed it in the sink. She pulled her hand back from the hot water faucet and turned on the cold instead. Hot water would only cook the eggs into the cloth. She left the sunsuit soaking and started water running in the bathtub and dumped Betsy in. "Ugh, there's even egg in your hair," exclaimed Jane. "I'll have to shampoo you." The rubber band snarled in Betsy's curls as Jane pulled it off, and Betsy clutched at her head and howled. She squinched her eyes tight shut and went right on howling as Jane tipped her back in the water, lathered her hair, and then rinsed out the suds. "You can stop yelling now," said Jane finally. She rubbed Betsy's hair with a towel and asked, "Soap in your eyes?" Betsy opened her eyes cautiously. "No," she said in a surprised voice. "But there's soap in my mouth," she added indignantly. "Next time, keep it shut," said Jane unsympathetically. She put a clean sunsuit on Betsy and sat her down on the living room floor with a box of crayons and a coloring book. "And stay there," she said fiercely, "until Mother gets home." Don was scraping the remains of the last egg onto a piece of cardboard. He dumped it into the garbage can and called in to Jane. "Were there any eggs left?" "One. Why?" "Well, Betsy's right. It isn't hot enough to fry an egg on the pavement, but you know something? If I had some grease to keep it from sticking, I bet you could fry an egg on the lid of the garbage can. It's twice as hot as the pavement." Before Jane could say what she thought of that idea, she heard Mother at the front door. "Mother," she called, "a letter for you. Registered airmail." Mother was carrying a sack of groceries in her arms, so she didn't see Victoria on the floor. Victoria let out an indignant yowl when Mother stepped on her tail and leaped onto the bookcase, knocking the letter to the floor. "Oh, Mother," wailed Betsy, "you stepped on her tail." Jane snatched the letter up and waved it at Mother. Open it," she urged. "Poor Victoria," crooned Betsy, hauling the cat off the bookcase. "You ought to say sorry." "Say, 'I'm sorry, Victoria.'" I'm sorry, Victoria. She always gets stepped on when she lies in the doorway, and she knows it. Don, come take the groceries. Don carried the bag into the kitchen, shouting over his shoulder, Did you see your letter with 36 cents worth of stamps on it? Hadn't you better open it right away? Mother took off her hat and pushed her damp hair back from her forehead. Then she sat down and kicked off her shoes. Then she took the letter from Jane and fanned her face with it before she opened it. While Mother read the typewritten letter, Jane picked up the envelope and shook it, but no dollar bills fell out. Not that she expected them to, really. Is it from great-great-Uncle John? She asked. No, it's from a lawyer. I told you so, said Don. But it's about great-Uncle John. He's dead. Oh, said Jane, stopped, embarrassed. She felt as though she ought to say something more, that she was sorry or something. But after all, she had never seen great-Uncle John. Betsy knew what to say. She looked up from the cat on her lap and remarked politely, I hope he had a lovely funeral, like my goldfish. But it wouldn't take pages and pages just to say that, said Don hopefully. Maybe he's left us $1 million. No, he didn't leave us any money, said Mother, glancing back over the letter. Not even 1,000? Not even 100? Asked Don. Not even anything? He did leave us something, an apartment house in Palm Glade. I believe it was where he lived himself. Oh, Mother, is that near the ocean? Cried Jane. Oh, I hope it's near the ocean. Why, can't we just go and live in it? Think of the money you'd save not paying any rent. Hot diggity, a whole apartment house, shouted Don. We can live in one apartment until all the dishes are dirty and everything is good and messed up, and then we can lock the door and move into the next apartment until all the dishes... Oh, hush, John, interrupted Jane. No fooling, Mother. What are you going to do with it? I don't know, replied Mother, looking a little dazed. Sell it, I suppose. Mr. Merrill, he's the lawyer who's handling great-Uncle John's estate, writes that the place is in rather poor repair, but several people have already asked him whether it will be for sale. And there's a lot in the letter about taxes that I don't understand very clearly. Oh, dear. He seems to think I ought to go down and take a look at the place before I make up my mind about it. Oh, let's, cried Jane. Why, I've never been farther away from Philadelphia than Baltimore in my whole life. Just think, Florida. We studied about it in school. Palm trees, flamingos, orange groves. Sharks, alligators, hurricanes, added Don. We studied about it, too. Oh, dear, I just don't know, murmured Mother, frowning at the letter. Of course, I would have to take the lot of you, and it would be rather expensive. Still, I suppose I'll get some money out of it, eventually, and it's not as if you'd be missing any school. And luckily, I have 2 weeks vacation coming to me. And luckily, I won't be 12 until October, so I can still go half fare. And luckily, Betsy is only 4, so she can go for free, said Don practically. And luckily, Victoria is only a cat, so she can go in a box, added Jane. Oh, no, we couldn't possibly take Victoria with us, exclaimed Mother. Betsy clutched Victoria fiercely. Yes, we can too take Victoria, she cried. But we're going on a long trip, on a train, and Victoria would hate it, explained Mother. Perhaps the Schmidts would feed her while we're gone. The Schmidts lived over them in the upstairs half of the little row houses. They're going away on their vacation tomorrow, objected Jane, for 2 whole weeks. Ellen was telling me yesterday. I just love riding on trains, announced Betsy dreamily. Why, you've never even been on a train in your whole life, exclaimed Don. You don't know everything about me, replied Betsy coldly. You think you do, but you don't. And Victoria just loves riding on trains, too. That cat, said Mother. So, in the end, they took Victoria. Mother arranged with the library to take her 2 weeks vacation now, and more time if she needed it, and Victoria traveled in a box with a screened lid and behaved very well, considering. They went in the coach train, and the kind where the passengers were supposed to sleep sitting up because Mother couldn't afford a Pullman, even if she had just inherited an apartment house in Florida. Nobody slept very well, and by the time they got off in Palm Glade late in the afternoon, they were stiff and tired and rumpled. They were the only passengers for Palm Glade. There wasn't a living thing in sight, except for a dog asleep in the shadow of a baggage truck, and the station master half asleep in his little office. He roused himself enough to say that no taxis met the trains in the summer, but that he could give them directions to 303 Oleander Drive if they wanted to walk. So they walked. Mother carried one suitcase, and Jane and Don took turns carrying the other suitcase and Victoria's box. Betsy lagged far behind. "I'm so hot," she complained. "But it's a nice clean heat," said Jane comfortingly. "It doesn't smell of trucks and melted asphalt the way it does at home. It smells of sand and flowers and," she sniffed, "it smells of ocean. It really does. Oh, Mother, the ocean can't be so very far away if we can smell it." "How do you know what an ocean smells like?" argued Don. "You never smelled one before." "I just know," replied Jane. "Come on, Betsy, I'll take your hand." Palm Glade was bigger than it looked from the station. They walked along the main street for 3 or 4 blocks. More than half the little stores had signs saying, "Will reopen November 15th," or "Closed for the summer." There were vacant lots, too, full of brightly colored flowers growing wild right there beside the sidewalk. They found the right corner and turned onto Oleander Drive. There were no sidewalks on Oleander Drive, so they walked in the pebbly, sandy street. They passed several apartment houses and a big hotel boarded up. Betsy began to limp. "Aren't we there yet?" she whimpered. "There's a stone in my shoe." "Just a little further," said Jane cheerfully, hoping she was right. And she was. There it was, number 303. They set their luggage down and stared at their new property. It was a long, low, white stucco building with a red tile roof. Masses of shrubbery covered with strange, brilliant flowers grew all around it. There were several different kinds of palm trees on the wide green lawn, and one enormous live oak with a cluster of garden chairs beneath it. An elderly lady was sitting in one of the chairs, knitting and reading, both at once. She glanced up and peered at them over her glasses, and then went back to knitting and reading. Somehow it hadn't occurred to Jane until this very minute that there would actually be people living here, and she suddenly felt very dusty and bedraggled. She straightened Betsy's hair ribbon and tried to smooth down her own rumpled dress. Don was reading out loud the little signs beside the front door. "No peddlers, no children, no pets. Manager, apartment 5. "Thank goodness there's a manager," said Mother. "Let's go find apartment 5. They picked up their luggage and straggled into the building. The long hall was barely lighted by 2 feeble bulbs, and it was all they could do to make out the numbers on the doors. "Remind me to put some stronger light bulbs in tomorrow," said Mother. "A penny saved is a penny earned," quoted Don. He caught Jane's eye, and they both grinned. Apartment 5 turned out to be at the far end of the long, dim hall. Mother set down her suitcase and knocked on the door.